Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar that's going to be delivered by Wendy Perry. Wendy Perry and I have known each other for a number of years now. I'm just trying to think how long it's been. It's been for a little while. Wendy has really evolved in the training industry and changed and doing lots of different things in different sectors of the training industry. And a lot of what she's doing now, which I'll let her introduce that, is more around the business end of running an RTO and operations and staff management and things like that. So I'll let her show that. This webinar is being recorded today, so everyone will have access to a copy of the recording. Originally, this was the presentation that Wendy was going to do at the conference, and unfortunately she was ill. She's much better now, still on recovery, but doing much better. And I welcome you all on board, and I'm going to now hand over to Wendy. Wendy, hi.
Hi there, everybody, and hope you're all doing well. It's great to be with you. I think if there's a chat function there, you just might want to let me know if the sound's all good for you. And I was just playing around with my sound just a little bit before. Thanks for having me, Ange, and I'm really sorry I couldn't make the conference last week. By all accounts, I can see on social media and all the photos, it looks like you had a great time. And really happy to sort of share this presentation with you. There's some new content in here that I haven't shown anybody just yet. And so we will get to a part in the webinar where we talk about 21st century capabilities. And we're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at those out to 2030. So this is for the workforce really broadly, but it's also an opportunity for you to do a bit of a skills assessment for your own organisation if you're an RTO, and even for yourself in terms of being a leader in this area too. When we had a look at the description, we talked about this sort of starting point that Australia does have a really strong reputation in the vet system, and I think often we just perhaps don't realise that if you're not doing work on a global scale or internationally, you don't realise how well regarded the system is. So I want to start there and then work through some of the changes and things that we're seeing, and this is probably in the next couple of years in terms of the window. However, as I mentioned, when we talk about the 21st century capabilities, that's well and truly out to more that 2030. So much government policy and change. No doubt at the conference you talked about, things around compliance and regulation and what was happening with training packages, and compared notes on different markets and funding and technologies that you're seeing coming into the sector as well. And this presentation is kind of like a picture of where things are going to, and not just thinking about your own kind of local market or perhaps a state or territory that you're operating in, but certainly that international picture as well. And we'll talk about some of the development needs that we've uncovered in different countries. And I think rather than only considering the notion of recruiting international students, what I'd like you to consider is how is it that you can take the capability that you have developed within your registered training organisation and your enterprise and actually productise that and turn it into something that other countries and other institutions want. And if we have a look at who is kind of the best in the world in relation to vocational education and training, and I guess I haven't got the sort of criteria to absolutely define best, but in terms of reputation, do you want to put some comments into the question chat box as to who you think the top 3 countries are in the world? Because I think there's a huge opportunity for us to lead in relation to this, and also for us to learn from other people. And this is my sort of pick list, if you like. So Australia, why are we known so well? Actually, not many other countries have a qualifications and training package system like ours. If they do, they've probably copied it from Australia. And one of the things that really stands out when we're doing work internationally around workforce planning and development and VET, or they call it TVET, Technical Vocational Education Training Policy and Planning, is our level of industry engagement. That really stands out when we have delegations that are visiting, when we're doing keynotes and work in an international sense and going to conferences. So I've bolded the top 3, if you like, but the others on the list are strong with different aspects too. Finland is really interesting. I don't know if this came up at the conference, but the notion of trainer assessor capability is absolutely key. And in Finland, you have to have master's qualifications to teach in vocational education and training, as well as the highest sort of level qualification in your industry or in your field. And they, in fact, do much more around kind of like mandating the level of professional development that everybody needs to even, enter or stay, be retained in their vet system. There is a number of things that are different. Like, it is fully funded by the government in Finland. And so, there's things that are quite different. But what really is strong is how much credibility they put on that role of being that vet teacher trainer. And I think that we'll see whatever government gets in terms of the election result, but I think that we'll see the government and also our regulators really hone in on that teacher capability, and hopefully they take some lessons from what Finland does. Scotland, I guess, has been really strong, and again, it's like Australia with their industry links and connections. They have, the national qualification sort of system. Quite a bit of that was probably imported into our framework when we first started back in the 90s with training packages. And again, that kind of level of collaboration that they have across their sector is excellent. Singapore is really known for being kind of out there, forward thinking, particularly around technology. But interestingly enough, they are not nowhere near as strong on employer and industry engagement. And that's actually a capability development gap that you might want to perhaps consider if that's an area that you're strong in. Germany is really well known for its apprenticeship system. They talk about the dual qualifications, but it's probably going away a little bit. It needs a little bit of reform, I'd suggest. And then you've got Canada, England, and New Zealand, and that's really because of their national frameworks, which are really quite similar to Australia. And there's heaps of crossover between Australia and New Zealand. So if you want to learn from the best, you would certainly have a look at these different systems and the way that people put things together around their programs and their packages. The photo there, though, is actually from Malaysia when we went to Sarawak last year. And this registered training organisation is called PPKS. And I guess, I don't know how many people have travelled and you've had a look at different registered training organisations. I was incredibly impressed with the facilities that these people have, their level of professional development, the level of support that they had. And so one of the things that I think into the future we really need to consider is, at the moment we might be in the top 3 or top 5 in the world, but there are other countries that are literally taking the best components of TVET systems from around the world, like Malaysia, and they are jumping ahead potentially of where we're up to. And, the competition is not local, it's not in your state or territory, it's not in your country, it is international. And this is a sort of potential risk for your continued business in terms of registered training organisation, and something that we'll pick up a little bit later on down the track. If you want to know a little bit more about Finland in particular, because I have a sense that we'll be picking up some of their approaches. For example, teachers in Finland they spend 600 hours a year on professional development. So it's a huge investment that they do. So you might want to check out the Finnish system in a nutshell. It's a great report, and it just sort of outlines the things that they've got in place. So we're going to move back now to Australia, and I don't know about you, but I am really kind of, tired of hearing about all of the things that are happening with this sort of RTO fail. I think we're sort of moving, hopefully, we keep on saying hopefully we're moving past this kind of era, it feels like, even though it's a couple of years, of the RTO fail. And in the past, I've said, I guess, some predictions or things that I think are going to happen about, 20% and up to perhaps a third of the RTOs won't be here this time next year. I think more and more that we see student bailouts and complaints, and just recently I was having a look at some of the figures in WA, for example, with what their regulator had published. Just the number of registered training organisations that are risking the quality of the training system with non-compliance is badly outstanding. It's just an outstanding amount, which is incredibly negative. And no doubt at the conference, and with the work that Ange does with her team, she's helping you around anything that is related to compliance and where things are moving to. But I've got no doubt that we'll see still more significant change around the standards for registered training organisations, and even more of a crackdown on things like the time that you're allowed to potentially become compliant. I think the tolerance level for what's happening in the vet system has just gone. The other problem, and maybe you touched on this too, is vet fee help. And I've put this picture here. It's perhaps a little bit cheeky, but actually the Fairfax Media report reported about the Australian Institute of Professional Education said that it was a $1 million cost to taxpayers for people that completed a human resource diploma. And in fact, there was $111 million paid out in 2014 for just 117 completions. Unbelievable. Now, if you are a training provider that's currently accessing vet fee help, massive risk to your organisation. I got a little bit of hate mail when I wrote something, it was late last year, about scrapping vet fee help, and it was really because of where it was going to, the fact that there's so much controversy, scandal around it, and surely we could do better. But I know that there were some people that were providers, and of course, they do the right thing, and I can completely understand that. But I feel like the program now is so tainted that it won't continue in the format that it is. And of course, depending upon which side gets in, there's just going to be a review anyway. Even the name of it, the structure, the fact that it was brought in with such open arrangements over it, and I don't know if people saw on Q&A on Monday night, but there was Christopher Pine and Anthony Albanese, and they both admitted to mistakes, if you like, particularly pointing to vet fee help. But if that's in your mix in terms of your business, I would really be looking at alternatives and considering how reliant you might be on that type of funding. Okay, the other thing, and I guess look, we've heard this mantra for such a long time now, is about being demand driven. But depending upon what side of politics you're on in particular, demand driven means different things. So generally speaking, if you've got a Labor state government or federal government, they talk about demand in relation to individuals and students. If it's Liberal, then they talk more about employers and industry. But what we've seen around the country, and this is pretty prominent now in Victoria and states also like Queensland and South Australia, is much more of an understanding of economic priorities than looking at industry and regional priorities, and then how that feeds into vocational education and training and the prioritisation of potential qualifications programs and more flexibility as well. So this demand driven by employers and industry, and trying to get the evidence to underpin that to then put into the vet plans, is an area that I think we're going to see an increasing focus on. So I've got my picture there of the guys where we did this project in Robinvale, which was supported by the Victorian government in the Sunraysia region. And we were able to do a skills needs analysis with a sample of employees from the biggest almond processors in the country and the biggest olive oil producer and exporter as well. And this really came about because they had pain in relation to recruitment of people and the retention and then their skills development. And they wanted to better access and tap into the regional workforce. The other picture there, I don't know if anyone recognises it, that is Singapore. And as I mentioned, that's a massive gap. It's really interesting I met people from Singapore at the NCVR conference last year, and they came to us sharing about this project that we'd done in Robin Vale. It had got a finalist, an award. It was an award finalist in the Economic Development Australia national awards as well. And they were just fascinated by how we'd been able to work with those employers and get them to drive the whole process and, potentially uncover their pain. So Australia really is seen as leading in this particular area, and Singapore is keen to get that capability as a priority. Now, if you have watched some of the things that I've been presenting lately, you perhaps would have seen a much more of a global kind of picture to what we're doing. And there's an example that I just want to share with you now, which I think is incredibly clever about how this registered training organisation has been able to differentiate themselves. So you might want to put into the question chat box if you know of Charlton Brown. I've probably known them for many years, back to when I was sort of working with Reframing the Future, and we were doing all of those professional development projects. So probably about 12 or 13 years ago, I first came across them. Back then, they were like a nannying school, so offering childcare kind of training. They've come such a long way, and they have this global Linkages scholarship and a program. And what it enables is for their students to work with a lead trainer in different countries across children's services, elder care, disability and community services. And they work on philanthropic projects in the Indo-Asian region. So if I can sort of put this in a really practical context for you, what does that mean? For example, there are students that might be studying childcare here in Australia. They have an international work placement or experience now. And, they're doing things like treating head lice on families and children in the context of that childcare kind of setting, other tasks as well. But they've literally been able to position themselves so that they have, significant waiting list and huge interest to be able to get that kind of international global experience. And I guess who would have thought that people would want to do that, particularly, some of those tasks like the head lice treatment. But the way that they have designed their program and then the fee that they're able to charge is really quite astounding. So regardless of what industry you're in, I would suggest that you do consider and have a look at how is it that they've sort of set themselves up, because the next sort of phase that we're going into is of differentiation. Like the value add that you bring, whether it's to your students or to employers or to your industry, is going to be absolutely critical for you to be able to define, but for people to be able to understand it and explain it and do it in a very practical way. Perhaps you might want to comment in the question chat box how many people are currently working in an international context. And I wrote a blog just this week sort of connected to this idea in this conference, this sort of presentation, which basically says that all registered training organisations should be thinking globally and internationally. And perhaps it's not for the reasons that you think. Some people might automatically think, oh, that's perhaps about student recruitment and, funding and income and so on. It's actually more to do with needing to position yourself and demonstrate this differentiation, and also show that you're up with global trends and you understand what's happening, not just here in Australia, but internationally as well. And there are a number of sort of support mechanisms that you can tap into. So, for example, with the free trade agreements, there's a program that's just been awarded to around about 12 or 14 different providers, if you like, including the likes of Australia-China Business Council, to look at China, Korea and Japan for registered training organisations. I think ACPET maybe picked up one of the contracts as well. There's local chambers and so on that have picked up the opportunity to roll these programs out. So if you are just kind of like considering the markets or wondering where you might go, or maybe you're in a market or two and you're thinking where to next, I highly encourage you to think about those free trade agreement seminars. I can see there's some chat comments there about operating internationally but not for accredited courses. One of the other things that I think in an international context, before we go on to something different, that is really key, we talked about how is it that you can productize your intellectual property and how can you put it together in a way that others can learn from you. Certainly, you can offer your accredited courses and qualifications and get your CRICOS registration and manage that through with your students and so on. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. But I think more important, it is the actual capability development of other institutions, so other equivalent of registered training organisations, TVET institutions in other countries where you can have partnership arrangements and you're working on that teacher trainer capability and program design, and much more of a peer-to-peer approach. I've seen people fail really badly in this international market because they know that Australia has a strong reputation. They go on trade missions and they go over and meet people and so on, and they have a very paternalistic kind of attitude, like we've got the best, training packages and content in the world, and you guys kind of want it, and we sort of know that, and it just comes across shocking. It's not really about true relationship development. It has to be more of a peer-to-peer partnership, I believe, where you look at what's the benefit for both sides and what can you learn from your partners in other countries, rather than thinking, like for example, we had a registered training organisation that we worked with just recently where the board had a view that, we'll just pick up our model and then we'll put it sort of into this other country or location. It's so not how it works. You've really got to put yourself into the other people's shoes and truly understand, what are the workforce problems that they're trying to solve, and then how can you work with them. And I guess what I'm suggesting here is that more often than not, it is about that capability development between the two institutions, and then, the student side of things can flow. But a lot of people haven't made the most of that capability development opportunity. Okay, I want to talk now about some of the kind of new areas around literacies and where the opportunities are too. You've probably picked up, and I don't know if this is a topic of discussion, about this whole capability around entrepreneurship, innovation, of course. There's sort of like a dropout crisis that we're trying to manage. There's so many alternatives and things that people can change. And there's all sorts of cultural aspects and so on. But this notion, and these pictures come from the trip that we did to the US. This is in San Francisco on the left-hand side with Holly in a co-working space, who's an Australian entrepreneur living and working in San Francisco now. Things like raising capital is a core capability for her, being able to network to the right people. We went to Google, which does look exactly like the movie, even down to the dinosaur and so on. I feel like there's capabilities, if you like, that people are needing, like now and into the future, which is entirely missed out of the vet system at the moment. So I have seen some examples of people taking existing qualifications and trying to make them a bit more entrepreneurial. But we actually did a piece of work for one of the state governments where we had a look at, could we map entrepreneurial capabilities back to training packages and qualifications? The certificate for it in small business is just not going to cut it. And in fact, the way that training packages are written is counterintuitive to what I'm talking about. I'll give you just a quick example. A training package will say follow rules and follow regulation and policy and procedure. Entrepreneurs will break rules. A training package unit will say, undertake significant market research and, really full on, kind of extensive business planning and so on. An entrepreneur would say, all right, I'm going to get a minimum viable product, and the way that I'm going to validate it is to see if I can sell it. Certainly I know that a number of the skill service organisations are kind of looking at this area, And also there's a bit of a philosophical debate, can you teach some of these things? But what I would suggest to you is that if you're starting to spot things, trends and so on, but you've got the training package and the units and the qualification that you're working with, I would do much more exploration of non-accredited courses with new content. And then, down the track, we might see the training packages catch up. But I wouldn't be or have the mindset that, if it's not in the qualification or the training package, we shouldn't be doing it. I think you really need to be exploring where things are going to and be seen potentially in a leadership role, because that also puts your point of differentiation out there too, and then help to influence the work of the industry reference committees and the skill service organisations. That's a little bit of a soapboxy topic, I guess, but I feel incredibly strongly about it, and a lot of training organisations just have these restrictions that they kind of put on themselves, and they don't necessarily need to. Okay, let's talk about some of the international and local opportunities, and you might want to put into the question chat box where you think some of them might be. But there's some incredibly common themes that are coming up. Surprisingly, or perhaps not, every country is literally trying to solve the same set of workforce problems. But, maybe it's a plus or a minus. For example, and, it's in pockets too. So, maybe in a state like where I'm from in South Australia, unemployment rate is really high. So we're all on about creating more jobs and attracting investment. The work that we've been doing in Wellington in New Zealand, for example, it's certainly a thriving kind of city, and they have an amazing, positively Wellington brand, and they actually truly demonstrate it. Excellent, when it comes to tourism opportunities and all that kind of stuff. But they have skills and labour shortages now. Their unemployment rate has dropped really kind of low. So they're back into figuring out how they can get much more from the supply side of things. So an interesting sort of set of circumstances. But most people are trying to get a better match between workforce supply and what their training system does. Most people are trying to solve employment or engagement or economic growth issues or problems, quality as well when it comes to their training system and so on, youth unemployment and engagement in particular. So there's a bunch of countries, like I've got others in the notes that you might want to consider. Maybe if we kind of like group these up a bit. It's a natural connection, of course, for us to have a look at, near neighbours in Asia and places like Malaysia and Indonesia, where it's not far to get to. And actually those two countries in particular, and in China have done this too, although China's a bit more complex, but they've pretty much taken the Australian system, and I know that they've tipped in other, a bit of Scotland and a bit of, New Zealand, which is probably a bit of Australia anyway, and a bit of the Singapore thing, but they have very, very similar systems. So it's quite easy to, from that point of view anyway, to operate in those two countries. China is, like, the opportunity is massive. I don't know how many people have been looking at China. It's much more complex, so many different regions. The numbers are outstanding, so huge to kind of grapple with. And I think a lot of people have underestimated the expectation around that. And it's a little bit similar with India. But the High Commissioner from India said something really interesting just recently, and he put it into a nutshell. And it was interesting to see the kind of reaction when we shared this with our clients and with providers about what's expected in India. So it's definitely high volume, it's low cost, like really low cost, and then it's quality that's fit for purpose from that country's eyes, if you like, from India's eyes. And too many people have gone in, literally with the quality stepped up beyond belief. I can understand that if you're delivering actual qualifications and qualifiers, of course, but many people have sort of also applied that to capability development and non-accredited courses, and it's almost like they've jumped straight to a qualification as a solution, and it's really probably not not required, and you actually can mitigate your risk as well if you're not issuing those qualifications, but more helping develop the capability. Philippines is interesting. They've introduced entrepreneurship as another component to their education system. Depends on where you are, but in somewhere like Vivacity, for example, many parents want their young people, their kids and so on, to go into white collar work. There's quite a differentiation between white collar and blue collar or farming type work. And, the opportunity there is much more around the back office side of things. South Korea, sort of learning more about South Korea. So, that's a country that I haven't done a lot in at the moment, but I've put it up there because of, together with Japan and China, it's on the federal government priority areas. And it's important for you to have a look at, in this context, in the states and territories that you're working in, what might their priorities be? If you can help host delegations coming in, I've found that to be a fantastic way to build connections and relationships. If you want to explore markets, you definitely have to go over there, but don't do that willy-nilly. We've had a registered training organisation that we met with on Monday, and they're sort of really randomly approached by an organisation in China, and they're kind of, should we go, shouldn't we? But, you've got to really do your homework and understand what the opportunities might be. So on the right-hand side, I put Fiji in there too, I should say. Now, Fiji, they're hosting the World TVET Conference later this year. You can put in a paper at the moment if you want to potentially present, and it's a really good conference. The sort of Pacific region is one to kind of watch, probably Fiji, Papua New Guinea. Again, just because so close, they really like Australian kind of content, and it would be more of that partnership delivery model that you would work in. And I put the Maldives on there because I went there a couple of years ago and I hope to go back again soon. But they were really interested in industry workforce planning and development. So if anyone's in, I don't know if anyone's in Victoria who's on this, I think most people look like they're from New South Wales. But in Victoria, they've got a big focus on Latin America and Brazil. Brazil is a huge market, massive opportunity. And the other areas that you could consider is Africa. But again, it's about the capacity to be able to actually afford some of the products and services. But from a pure growing market and opportunity, they'd be in the mix as well. I already touched on entrepreneurship. Industry growth areas are sort of the terminology that the current government's using. But I think we'll see still the notion of industry priority areas that we need to watch from the federal government, and then also all of the state and territory governments. A couple of years ago, New South Wales did do some of their industry strategies where they talked about priority sectors. Victoria's just released future industry strategies. I don't know if anyone's seen that. And they have a future industries fund as well, which has got multi-millions of dollars in it. There is a little bit about the transformation of the economy around manufacturing, but they've picked out other sectors too. And if you haven't had a chance to look at what's happening in Victoria, it's really interesting what they've done with their budget as well. And on the Workforce Blueprint website, there's a blog where we sort of summarises what's happening with strategies and the fund and the budget. We've talked a lot about international, of course, non-accredited training, regional, rural, and this whole SME startup land we'll come to in just a moment. But I put innovation in there broadly. Of course, we've got the ideas boom and the National Innovation Science Agenda. Some of you might want to consider this in the context of STEM, which is mostly talked about in education, but it has to be much more explicit and obvious in VET. Literally, into the future, all jobs are going to have a STEM component of capability in them. And what people are looking for is for that to be made more obvious, more explicit. So let's touch on some of these other areas. And I guess it's a good time going into the new financial year as well to think about what partnerships do you have? Where are they sitting now at the moment? How strong are they? What have you done, on developing that relationship? Where can you go to next? And this is a really simple example. And these pictures are from another amazing registered training organisation or training provider that we went to in Sarawak up the top there, and then with a guy that we're working with in Ireland. But we went to Austin in Texas in March this year. And one of the things that has emerged, which you could easily tap into as well, is the sister city relationship between Adelaide and Austin. It's almost like if you've got that sister city connection and, wherever you're located, if you're in Newcastle, Sydney, or whatever place you're located, those councils are usually really good at fostering those kind of sister city relationships. And it just opens so many doors for you. It's like getting a big smile and a hug almost when you go to these other countries, and people want to do as much as they can for you and, have something reciprocate. So whenever we're doing any work with training organisations and we're looking at the international markets that they should be in, a simple thing that we do consider is where are the sister city relationships that you could take advantage of, and how could you build that out into a potential partnership. So something that we're working on at the moment with Austin is around Entrepreneurs Week here in Adelaide, and joint sort of live streamed events, and also sister school and training organisation kind of relationship. And they have workforce development boards in the US. So, sort of a relationship between our organisation and those boards. So huge opportunities that just come out of like a relationship, and we're looking at where else we can take that to. Okay, let's move on to another kind of consideration, and just thinking, how can you flip this around to your advantage? This rise of non-accredited training is massive. And the online training explosion, which is sort of the next slide, is just gone crazy. I think, though, that people are becoming a bit more discerning about the credibility, because literally anyone can put up a course on Udemy or Lynda or Treehouse or one of those kind of sites, and often at a really low price as well for the content. But if you haven't got, a balance or a mix of non-accredited training in what you're offering, then I think it's a massive opportunity for you, because you can literally take very similar content that you would do in a formal accredited sense and, package it up into all sorts of other sort of content pieces. You can repurpose your resources in your content in all sorts of different ways and do different combos of them. So if I was looking at, what's the product mix that you've got, certainly this has to be something that you're considering. And linked to that, as I mentioned about the online training explosion, in some states, if you're a member of your local library, you can then do any lynda.com course for free. So the relevance of what VET kind of offers, I think it's really being questioned now and into the future. And, how does this sort of line up against some of the other opportunities that are still about developing skills or knowledge or expertise? So certainly something to think about. So whether or not you're already offering things online, particularly with video content, video is massive. But if you're not familiar with Lynda or Udemy or any of those sites, check them out, because they are just huge. Lynda's been bought by LinkedIn as well, so you can sort of see some of the writing on the wall as to where this might be headed, with mega multinationals making lots of acquisitions to bring in that sort of capability around online learning and linking it to their social media sort of platforms. Okay, if you're in regional locations, I think the news is pretty good for you, because we are seeing governments, not just federal but state and territory governments, much more conscious of the balance between what they're doing in capital cities and so on, and then also with regions. And we are seeing a real kind of expansion of regions, either through the local council or perhaps the Chamber of Commerce, or maybe through Regional Development Australia, and if you have government sort of regions as well, wanting to understand what their workforce requirements needs are and solve, their problems around potential restriction of growth or their local unemployment or youth engagement or whatever. So this is definitely an area to watch. We've had the National Stronger Regions Fund, and I think agriculture, food and wine, depending upon what location you're in, they will be in those mix of economic priorities to keep an eye out for. The other thing that I just want to mention here, I don't know if anyone's currently operating in Northern Australia, but the amount of infrastructure funding support that's going into Northern Australia is absolutely unprecedented. And particularly for our clients who might be in Queensland or maybe in New South Wales, where they could see that sort of extension into Northern Australia, things like the cattle industry, huge training and development sort of opportunities if you're open to it. And also working with Indigenous people on their businesses and that whole area of entrepreneurship. I think we're heading, for some states and territories, we're heading to a model where we will see, each region, for example, have a regional workforce action plan that then rolls up into industry and state and territory priorities, which is great. It's good that we're balancing this out and making sure that our regions are really thriving as well. Okay, something else that I think is going to be an important service. So if you're not already doing this, you could potentially think about a partner or developing the capability in-house, is how to undertake skills needs analysis. Just recently, we've been engaged with a partner in Victoria, actually, with a region, because they didn't, so they're a registered training organisation, engaged with us and introduced us to their client, who's a big food processor, because they didn't have the capability in-house to be able to do skills needs analysis, job profiling, and I think there'd been a bit of history there. Perhaps the relationship hadn't always been great. Anyway, skills needs analysis, where you can quickly see, this is an example of a heat map of priorities, where you can quickly see where the skills gaps are, or where there's no gaps, and where there are common gaps across the board. I mean, even this week we were called in by one of the state government departments who are looking at their own workforce, and they've got some expertise, but they still don't know how to build a job skills profile and how to map that to units of competency, and then what was the process for undertaking that skills needs analysis. So something that should be in the mix, either in the context of working with a potential partner who's got that capability, or building that in-house. Now, I wonder how much discussion there was about training packages and the skills service organisations at the conference. You might want to put some comments into the question chat box about that. And I can see there's some chat going on about the online sort of side of things, but not for skills development or application. Well, one of the things that we're seeing is these new discovery technologies. So last year, probably the flavour was much more augmented reality. This year, the flavour was virtual reality, where you can, in fact, teach skills application and techniques and so on using these new discovery technologies. The other thing that I saw earlier this year was artificial intelligence with robots that recognise natural language, and suggestions of where that might go. Like, I think it's early days at the moment, and it's perhaps not too culturally acceptable to talk about what some of the tasks are that robots could do into the future. But the notion of robots being coaches, mentors, teachers is definitely in the mix around the discussion into the future. So training packages. Okay, I'm not sure how much connection or contact people have had with the different skill service organisations. There are a couple there that we know quite well. We know the people that are kind of running them. And really where they're at the moment is still getting to know their industry reference committees. It's a bit like going on a blind date, sort of, because you've got these organisations that have been awarded the contract, you've got these existing IRCs, and it's kind of like you guys have to get together and get on. I think for this year, we won't see too much kind of happening because they are in that relationship building stage, perhaps some scoping out of, potential models and services. And I think we'll start to see language shift here as well to more the notion of capabilities, not just skills. And it's perhaps, in line with some of that work that I mentioned before that we're doing about 21st century capabilities and those different horizons, because I know that the skill service organisations, they're quite keen to sort of reinvent, but take the good parts, if you like, of our training package system and situate them so that they are much more future kind of focused and orientated. So basic suggestion here is make sure you're on all their mailing lists, that you're following them on their social media channels and so on. I know a few weeks back they had a meeting with Minister Scott Ryan, and this is when they all kind of came together and sort of got introduced and so on. And they have, it seems at the moment, got the imprimatur and the permission to sort of reconceptualise how things can happen. But they've potentially got a big job on their hands, depending upon what industries they're working in, to sort of bring their industry partners along with that too. And we all kind of know about some of the potential restrictions about awards and all that sort of stuff too. But the expectation's high, let's say that. Okay, I have touched on this already, but just want to reinforce video, if that's not in your strategy, in your resources, in your material, easily accessible, really short in terms of micro-learning. This example here is of augmented reality. So I don't know how many people are using augmented reality. If you haven't seen it yet or you don't know about it, certainly check it out. And then virtual reality would be the next step, and probably lots of people will just skip straight to virtual reality. With virtual reality now, you can easily make content. You can get Google Cardboard glasses for a few dollars each. You don't have to get the expensive Oculus Rift anymore, and you can then literally design and develop content in relation to virtual reality that can, show people or show content that you would normally be able to put people in physically. For example, perhaps oil spills or fire or evacuation or issues around safety. You can create content using VR that can demonstrate those things much more clearly. So it has to be in the mix, I'd suggest, if you want to be leading and if you want to be around for the long haul, because that's kind of where student market is heading towards, and if you're not demonstrating that you're keeping up with the latest technology, then I think you're going to be left behind. This next thing I want to touch on, it's obvious. I think it's really obvious, but perhaps we don't always, have this in terms of our outcomes. I think we're going to see, though, a much stronger connection with vet outcomes around employment. And this is an example about some projects that are being run down in Victoria. So in Victoria, they have a back to work fund, and because it's a Labor government, they've given a lot of support, of course, to the TAFE institutes down there. But they're running all sorts of different programs to tackle, again, sort of perennial issues of unemployment and working with youth in particular. Very hungry to know about models that have worked and, different approaches and new methodologies and so on. So perhaps there's some capability that you have in that space, maybe even working with particular cohorts that other institutes and governments and so on in Australia would want to learn about. And then maybe there's an opportunity to expand that out into an international context. So look, we have talked about the future, but I want to kind of go next level just in these last few minutes or so and talk about this notion of out to 2030. And I know that most of you go, oh, that's like nuts. How will we know what's going on then? You might have strategic plan perhaps for your organisation. Maybe it goes to 3 years, maybe it goes to 5, maybe you've brought it back down to 18 months because you think it's too hard to predict. And I think these things will actually happen sooner than this. But I just wanted to tell you a very quick kind of story. Last year, it was in April last year, we were doing a workforce plan for a company in the energy sector in a different stage. And all of our research was pointing to the fact that with solar, with people going off the grid, with battery, with developments in renewables, their demand for their kind of core product would drop away. And if they didn't transform their products and services and their workforce quick enough, they'd potentially need to cut their workforce, by probably somewhere between 10 and 20%. It was a difficult project because they didn't want to hear that because they had a no forced redundancy policy, which literally meant that they can't reduce their workforce at all. They have to keep that cost and they have to repurpose in some way, shape or form. But they also had a very stable, potentially stagnant, long-term workforce, a set of circumstances that would be very, very difficult to manage. But, the alternative, I guess, wasn't acceptable to them. Contrast this with another project, which is the one sitting in the middle there, where back in 2013, we were sat around the boardroom table in the Long Tan room at the Naval Air Force and Military Club on Hutt Street in Adelaide. And this had all of the Defence Prime CEOs sitting around the table and people that were leading small and medium-sized enterprises. We're working through a particular approach that we take where we do a scenario plan for the future workforce, and then we have a look at what skills and capability they need. And this group of CEOs said there are 7 must-win projects. A very ambitious, we all thought kind of, I don't know how that's going to work, but a very ambitious kind of scenario back then. And they all committed to it. Of course, all sorts of stuff has played out in the media and, probably this time a year ago, we never would have thought we would have won any of the defence contracts. But literally, we can get to the point now where we're starting to tick these off. I have a belief that because that group, and this sort of applies to how you might think about this too, because that group had something very aspirational, they committed to something which was a must do. They didn't just go for a couple of projects, they went for the whole hog. I think that's had a massive impact on how the industry has then banded together and worked towards that common goal. And it would be great to see registered training organisations being much more aspirational and ambitious about what they can achieve into the future. And the other picture, I don't know how many people have checked out IBM Watson just yet. This isn't something that's, years and years out. It's actually available now. IBM Watson, you can access that service where IBM Watson can crunch millions and millions of data sets, information, things that have been published to help you with your research, with answering questions. They use a common example where IBM Watson helps a GP and a doctor in an emergency sense diagnose, young child that's coming with mystery symptoms. What could this be? We definitely need to watch where IBM Watson goes because the power of that knowledge base working alongside us is key. And if we say that, the knowledge and the content and then the application and the skills development is our space, that has the potential to massively transform the way that we deliver. But if you're not aware of it as well, it could completely steamroll through your whole organisation and you might not have a business left. So these emerging technologies are key to watch the application and see if you can get ahead of the game and become a partner or try it out, test it out. So to just finish off, I want to kind of summarise this notion of the 21st century workforce and capabilities and what we're probably going to see. I hope that we have an aspiration to have a world-class vet system. I think we're starting to see some states and territories at least aspire to something like that. I think we're going to start to use language around this 21st century skills framework and influencing qualifications and the notion of economic priorities, industries, priorities, regional, and then also putting the critical job role and critical capabilities first, and then mapping it back to the national training system. That's kind of the way, finally, I've been advocating for this for a while, that things seem to be moving in that direction. And on the last slide, I just want to share with you these 21st century capabilities. I haven't shared them with another vet audience just yet. They are draft, they're under development, but I'd like you to see, and of course there's a whole heap of content sitting behind them, but I'd like you to just go through and see where you think you've perhaps got some strengths and where there might be some gaps. These apply really broadly, if you like, to anyone who's kind of going to be in the workforce into the future, but you can think about this for your own organisation as well. So either yourself, your team, or your organisation. But these are the sorts of things that we're seeing organisations all the time saying that they want this in their future workforce. Industry is also talking about it, and then a lot of the other international research and examples that I've touched on highlight this too. So something like entrepreneurship, for example, probably fits in that learning and mastery. So under each of these capabilities is another subset, if you like, of content. Yeah, and Ange, I can see you've had a big focus on purpose and vision as well. So this is for your organisation, but it's also for yourself. Intelligence and imagination is that sort of combination. Whether or not that's artificial intelligence as well is kind of key. This notion of 21st century science, technology, engineering and maths is coming through really strongly, and so is being able to make your career resilient, your workforce resilient, plan that out, manage that into the future. Global context, absolutely critical, regardless of what context you're in. Even if you think that you're only going to be working locally, you know, that connection to where things are going globally, the notion of global communities. We're seeing the rise of peer-to-peer economy, you know, freelancer and all those sort of sites. We're also seeing it's called BYOT, bring your own team. So, you know, teams or individuals being hired because of their expertise. So it's something to consider just around, you know, what are those capabilities? What do they mean potentially for you as a leader? What might they mean for your organisation? What areas would you say you're strong in? So this is a bit about, in the description, about a bit of a skills gap analysis, and where do you think you need to focus your development, and appreciate some of the comments about what thing people have got in mind about what they're going to do as well. So look, we need to wrap up. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you, but I'm hope that this has been helpful in terms of, I guess, getting down, and perhaps it's probably a little bit more detailed too in terms of what I could have shared in relation to the conference as well, because I think the time was a little bit more limited there. But I think as well, I can see some comments here. Looking at the list, this is what we propose to do to the department yesterday, almost identical. It's great to get that kind of feedback that this is, you know, similarly, people have got this sort of thinking in mind, and you are looking at this. We're looking at those three horizons, 2020, 2025 and 2030, and how this kind of mix of capabilities might change. I wish you really well in relation to your registered training organisation. I think the timing of where we are in vet at the moment is like a crossroad. It's kind of like make or break time. And if you are doing some of these things that we've talked about, then in terms of your sustainability, your growth, your survival, you'll be well and truly ahead of others, and you won't be one of those ones that is not around in a year's time. So thank you so much, and I'll just hand back to you if you want to see if there's any questions or any comments. That'd be great. And if we're not connected yet on LinkedIn, if everyone wants to get connected, that'd be great. And if there's some things that I've touched on, blogs or different things, and you want to follow up, feel free to send me an email too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was really, really good. As you may have seen, there's lots of conversation going on in the side panel there. We're looking at the international market now. As I said, we're also looking at New Zealand. One question I have for you is I've heard that New Zealand is taking on the Australian legislation when it comes to training organisations. Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't heard that they're directly taking on the legislation. I mean, we already have reciprocal agreements and arrangements with New Zealand on things like the legislation and the licensing requirements. So I haven't heard that specific kind of announcement as such. But I mean, if you do have a look at their system, it's so similar to ours. But you know, New Zealanders kind of they always like to put still their own twist on things, you know. So
because I've heard they're also taking on our WHS legislation. So there's a couple of things that they're taking over. And of course they will have to adapt it to their own culture as well. I'm going over to New Zealand in September, and I'm going to go meet with the PTEs, which is the private training enterprises over there. And I'm also meeting people to deliver international training over there. Because a big pathway for international students is they go through New Zealand and then come into Australia. So I'm looking at how we can work with those pathways. And with a lot of our clients, I know there are so many opportunities for them to be delivering training overseas. And I really want to work in that area. So I was chatting to Richard there. Dave's also looking at New Zealand and a couple other areas. So there's a few people that we want to work with to help them and guide them. So perhaps it's something that you and I could do some work on together as well.
Yeah, for sure. Because as I mentioned, you know, we have been doing those, we call them like vet opportunity plans for people, where we've been looking at their capability, their strengths, you know, whether or not they need to expand interstate as well, and then what regions and countries specifically would kind of be natural for them to consider, rather than just have, you know, I think because a lot of people, that there are opportunities now popping up, they sort of do come up randomly. And if you haven't got some prep or at least an idea as to where you want to go, I've seen lots of people spend a lot of money and not get a lot of return. So that's the danger.
Yeah. And that's why we're thinking of putting together like a mastermind group. So we've got a group of us who can get together and talk about what the opportunities are, so we can collaborate together so it's not so costly. But also identify where the possibilities are, where our clients in particular can work together overseas as well.
I agree. That's a really important point, Ange, because particularly if you're going to go like India or China or even Malaysia, like the numbers are like nothing like what they're like here. And so to get the strength and the capability and to be seen as the preferred choice, it'd be pretty rare that it would just be one training organisation, you know, presenting by themselves. You really do need that cluster and that network of capability to be able to pitch, if you like, and be seen as credible.
Yeah, and it's not just the credibility; it's the fact that we're getting these different intelligence and brains together, where they've got their different background and experience, where we can collaborate that together and have a stronger force going forward with getting into the international market, because we've got that collaborative group. So it's something that I'm really working towards. Big thing with Vivacity, we've done a major shift this year with our organisation. We're not so much about compliance anymore. We want to do a lot of focus on business development and growth, and that's where the conference came about. Was you can't survive on compliance alone. You need to have different strategies in place in your organisation, and going overseas is a huge strategy that I think a lot of our clients need to take on board. And that's what we want. We want to work collaboratively and bring these RTOs together, our clients together, so that we can have a stronger force across Australia and overseas.
Yeah, and I think it's also like in my experience or suggestion, like some people just do focus on one country. this might sound a bit counterintuitive or odd, but I actually think it's easier to go to multiple than just go to one.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, because you're learning from all. Like I know I've just gone into the Crycos area, and the big thing that I've done is I've got someone who's taking me around to all these other Crycos providers. So I'm not looking at just one Crycos provider. I'm looking at a range of different Crycos providers. So I'm learning so much just by going out and visiting them. So the same thing, I think, because then you compare, particularly with the international market, you can compare with the other, the different markets that are out there.
Yeah, and I mean the competition, there'll be other Australian providers, but pretty much the competition will be US, Scotland, Europe. There's, so you've got to really pull together and be able to show your strength there with that Australian approach, which, as I say, goes down. It's almost like, because you're Australian, you get like an immediate couple of ticks in the box.
Yeah, we're a likeable bunch.
Yeah, they think we're hilarious, generally speaking.
Yes. I think it's our laid-back nature.
Yeah, and they do think that we're really innovative and, as I say, got the strength for the industry. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the webinar today, Wendy. Much appreciated, and we'll get this out to the rest of the delegates and our members as well. I do encourage you to please connect with Wendy on LinkedIn, Facebook, also that Australian Vet Leaders group. That's a really good group to get onto in LinkedIn. There's lots of other people in there putting their ideas in there as well. I strongly recommend to all of our clients that you get onto LinkedIn, because there's so many groups in there that will help you get a better understanding of your industry, and so many ways of getting connected with other organisations as well. So thank you very much, Wendy.
No worries. Thanks for having me, and catch you later, everybody. Thanks for the comments as well. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
I'll see you soon. Also, I'm in Adelaide this week, so I might try and catch up with you next week. While I'm there. Bye.